Nerds International proudly presents
Yeah. You're listening to the Wild Die Podcast. 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 Listen 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 to the Wild Die Podcast.
Welcome to the Wild Eye Podcast. My name is Eric Lamoureux, aka No Sleeves McGee, and today for this bonus episode, this review episode, got my man Gary McCallum. How you doing, Gary?
I'm doing well. I'm especially well now that we're here alone together without Harrison. I can confess my truth towards you without having him being all jealous.
Yeah, he's something else. So yeah, I wanted to get Gary on because we're kind of late for our reviews, and turns out that we ran out of these the reviews from the Kickstarter episodes that we had. So if you remember, the goal here was to go through all the settings that were kickstarted, where we invited the creators on the show, and now we wanted to find out how they turned out. There was one last one. Well, there's actually three now, because we recently had Michael from Guardians of Umbra and John from Gods and Masters, but it's still too early for them to be out, but it was still Retribution, and turns out that it's not exactly completed. So we decided to just skip that and go straight to something more current, some Suede related. We've already reviewed Crystal Heart, but now we're going to review another setting for Suade. There aren't that many out yet, but I gave Gary the choice between a couple ones, and he decided to get Legion of Liberty. So this is what Gary's going to talk about.
It's very exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, let's go between the covers. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Welcome one and all to Between the Covers, the hottest and most greased up segment on this podcast. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, things are gonna get a bit weird in here.
No, it's nothing sexy.
Sorry, what?
It's kind of where we talk about a Savage Worlds book from cover to cover.
Like some sort of book club.
Well, essentially, yes.
Well, in that case, I'm leaving. Oh yeah.
All right, so Gary,
See you
if
later.
you were to summarize what Legion of Liberty is about in, I don't know, less than 100 words for like a pitch there, what would you say about it?
Okay, less than 100 words. So that's like 10 fingers 10 times.
Yep.
Got the beer knocked out already. That's good. I like to see that. 10 words 10 times. That's not easy. Actually, it is kind of easy. Legions of Liberty, superheroes of 1776. You play young superheroes during the American Revolution, trying to turn the tide of battle towards America becoming independent. And that's it. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
I think I named that tune in 20, maybe 30. I'm not counting. Someone probably let us know.
Yeah, I mean, that cover, man, every time I look at that cover, that's a beautiful cover.
Yeah, the art style from the person that drew this is fantastic. You'll see this scattered throughout the entire book, which is pretty neat. You can tell that style. You said you knew who drew this.
Yeah, that's the same guy that drew the Flash Gordon and some of the most recent Savage World stuff. Can't think of
So-
his name right now, but because been drinking a little bit. But yeah, that guy is.
Aaron Riley.
Yeah, Aaron Riley. That's the guy. As you would say, that's top notch right there.
Top notch, right? That whatchamacallit is top notch.
Yeah.
So, you like some superheroes, Eric? I'm pretty sure that superheroes aren't your favorite.
It depends. I mean, I'm more of a street level type of thing, but this seems more like Four Colors. But during the American Revolution, there's still some pretty cool stuff, I think, in there. At least from the cover, Witches, Lobster Man. I mean, that sounds pretty cool to me.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I did a read of this. I checked it out from front to back. It is I bought the PDF. This is regrettably one of the PDFs or one of the Kickstarters that I did not back. Couldn't really see myself playing this. Haven't really done much superheroes until I started hanging out a little more with Uncle Jay. Really liked the superhero stuff that he did. That really sort of brought me into the superheroes and the playing the superheroes fold. And yeah, so I went out and I spent my own hard-earned money. Cost me, I think it was only like $10 or something like this, for a 100-page PDF. Lots of good stuff in it. My initial thoughts, again, one of the few Savage Worlds products I didn't back. And again, I couldn't see myself playing this thing. So, but this Scott Marchand Davis is the author of this setting. Eric, you've had some dealings with him, haven't you, in the past? Like, full transparency, you know this guy. Are you writing for him, or you've written a thing for him?
A little bit. I mean, we did a review of Children of the Apocalypse on the show, and for Wise Guys, there was a crossover that he wrote for Wise Guys, crossover of Legion of Liberty and Wise Guys, but no, I haven't written for him yet. But the guy, I consider him a pretty good designer, Savage Worlds designer. That's his second setting already, and I see that he's working on a third one already, Relics and Raygun, that's begun playtesting. So the guy's pretty active there. So yeah, so what can we find in this book, Gary? Walk me through it, like chapter by chapter. What do we find in there?
All right. Well, first off, there's a lot of nice things in this book. Actually, to tell you the truth, I was a little disappointed with the layout of this book and the look of this book. It's not pretty. I got to be honest, man. The pages are parchment themed, so you kind of feel like you're reading like an old map, or like you know what I mean, that old sort of yellowy colored parchment paper. It's very singular throughout. The style of the book doesn't change front to back. The artwork for the header sections, like the credits or revolutionary superheroes, is written in that old school calligraphy kind of a look. Mm-hmm. So I mean, overall, the layout of this book, I feel like it's something that I could have done the layout for in my limited scope and limited ability. But I'm not judging this book by the layout. There are some beautiful pieces of artwork in this book, but it's not consistent front to back. You'll see that the Aaron Riley guy that we were talking about at the front did the front cover, which is absolutely beautiful artwork. And there's a few other very similar pieces throughout the book. You can definitely tell the difference between what was paid for the book and what was just acquired. I was looking up the image of George Washington, and I noticed that it was taken like right from the wiki pages. So some of this stuff is taken like directly from the internet and put in here. The tables and columns in a few places are just what's the word I'm looking for? They're very flat. Nothing sort of stands out. Nothing pops. The book from front to back is very monotone looking. But it does follow the same theme from front to back, and it is well organized, and the introduction, or the table of contents, I should say, is very well put together. I mean, it details everything you can find on every page. So as far as the book being put together, it is very well put together, even though it's kind of bland to look at, and visually it's nothing nothing that you're going to be like, oh wow, this is a beautiful book. Overall, I feel like I could have done the job. Like with my skill set, I feel like I could have laid this thing out. But if you're just looking at the visual appeal, I don't really want to say that. I wouldn't take points away from. I mean, I would, because it's all part of it, but it's not enough to damage the setting, if that makes any sense, right? It's no Karl Kiesler, but it's middle of the road. It's not junk by any means. It's decent enough, but it's not something that you just sort of stand back and admire. It's just there. So
you talking about the layout and like the font types, the calligraphy and all that. Is it still like easy to read because of that, or you found yourself kind of having your eyes getting tired from these fonts or layout?
Yeah, none of that stuff. The header bars are the same. They've just been resized. They're a flat color. Everything's sort of flat. There's no three-dimensional aspects to the stuff. The old school pirate looking calligraphy is various sizes throughout different banners and different bars and stuff like that, but it's consistent, which is good, right? It's not like it is just a mishmash of things put together. Some of the artwork on some pages, like if you go to, I think it's page 48 is what I put in my notes, you'll see that on the left-hand side of the page, it's probably a little bit past that, you have this really old school looking piece of art, and then on the very next page, you have a very modern, updated sort of superheroes. You can, the styles are offset. But yeah, it's not really anything to harp at. There is some beautiful artwork in this book, and there is some stuff that is taken that looks like old Victorian, it even looks washed over when you're looking at it, the artwork. Page 72, Eric, is what I'm talking about. You have a really cool looking bunch of revolutionary dudes. One guy's got the psionic blast coming out of his head with the purple rays, and the powered up fists and stuff, and it's very Aaron Riley cover-ish kind of cool looking artwork. And then right next to it, you have this washed out, it looks like somebody took Mod Podge and you know what I mean, put it over top of these old Victorian people. It looks like a painting that's a couple hundred years old that somebody took a picture of, and they don't sit well side by side. But as far as the text and stuff goes, it's very easy to read. And again, like I say, very consistent. So what I did was I went to the Kickstarter page to see what it boasts at the time of being kickstarted and how it holds up, and everything was spot on. Some of the cool things that it says are interact with historical figures like Washington, Hamilton, Franklin, and Sam Adams. They're all in the book, and you get to interact with every one of them, which is really cool. You get to exert political influence to support the Declaration of Independence. That is in the book. Part of it is very slick, I want to say. Foil a secret society of superhuman villains. That is in here. Trounce redcoat forces in traditional close quarter combat and black powder battles, also a check. And pit your superpowers against the elite British superhumans, also a check. And then lastly, fight mass battles with custom rules for superhero skirmishes. Now, I don't know if there's custom rules for the superhero skirmishes, but there is mass battles. There's some stuff that I'm going to get into in this book that actually kind of made me take a step back and be like, okay, this is actually kind of a neat sort of deal. Because usually when I play games, small skirmishes, I don't do mass battles, I don't do army men and that kind of stuff. But this was actually really cool. So the other thing was new tools for players and game masters. This book says that you're going to get 18 new powers. Some of them are very interesting with new variations on spells like Bomber, where you actually blow up and then just reform. That's kind of cool, right? And then 22 edges and hindrances for superheroes, which are also in here. There's some unique ones. I want to say basically all 22 are somewhat unique and interesting. The only one that I wrote down here that was a little weird, it's not even that it's weird, it's similar, is Quickload. Because you're in 1776 and you're using black powder guns, Quickload is it just allows you to reload in one turn instead of two, which is right out of 50 fathoms. It's but the other 21 are quite original, right? So you also get 10 Savage Tales. Eric, what is a Savage Tale?
Well, it's a short adventure. Sometimes they're called one sheet, but when they're one sheet, it's because they fit on one sheet of paper. A Savage Tale might be just a few paragraphs long, or it could be 5 pages long. It's basically a scenario for Savage Worlds.
All right, you passed my test. 1 second while I take a sip of my drink. Had I been a little more on the ball, I would have done that while you were talking.
No,
So,
that's all right. Well, before you get into that a bit further, I just wanted to ask you because, well, you and I, born Canadian, we learned Canadian history in school. Is there some kind of primer on the American history there for people that, you know, Europeans or Canadians or Mexicans that might play this game?
wow, why you got to be so racist against the Europeans? The answer to that is thank effing God, no. There is not. And I'll tell you why that's a good thing a little while later, because this is one of the things about this book that appeals to me on a scale where you're going to be like, yep, that totally sounds like Gary. So you got your 10 Savage Tales set in colonies, Europe, the Native and Native American territories. That's all in the book. Skimming through these, they look interesting. And I don't want to really talk about the adventures. We're going to talk about one sort of in detail, so you have an idea as to what's in this book. But the rest of it, I feel, is stuff about the book that is going to make you, or you should buy it if you're interested. It ends up with an adventure generator. I rolled up a couple adventures. I got to find them, which I'm going to do at the end here because we're going to get there. So there's an adventure generator in here that they list for raids, battles, reconnaissance, and skullduggery in the American Revolution. So yeah, everything checked out. Basically, he delivered exactly what he said you were going to get. So that's kind of cool. Setting the stage for this bad boy. This takes place between 1775 and 1783. So sorry about your cell phones and laptops, suckers, but you're going to get your, they don't even have aluminum cans you can tie strings to. Man, pigeon, you're sending pigeon, which is where Twitter probably came from, except back in the day. It was a real thing.
Yeah,
sorry about your first name.
Get your quill
right.
and ink and paper. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about your first aid, your antibiotics, your crappy alcohol. Sorry about your general lack of everything cool, man. 1776, you're basically living in the wilderness. There are towns back that are, somewhat established, like Boston and some of the bigger sort of East Coast places. They're a couple hundred years old. So you could go there and, traverse to there, but still, man, in the 1770s, if you wanted to play regular Joe and you get a scratch infection, you could literally die from that. So the one thing that I would like to note is that the authors respectfully acknowledge the importance of traditional lands of the nations, and that the territories colonized by the British and French in this time period were seized unlawfully and often deceptively from the indigenous people occupying them. The reason I wanted to bring this up is because this kind of stuff sort of irritates me. It's in the book as I feel like sometimes these things are just here to cover your own butt. You know what I mean? Like, we have to say this thing. It's like Deadlands says, we know slavery was a thing, but we're not addressing it. Sorry about slavery, but don't make it a part of your game. And that's what this statement is, because there are things, there's nothing in the book that this needs to acknowledge. Do you know what I mean? Like, your quests aren't about stealing lands from the Indians. They're not about having Indians for slaves or any of that kind of stuff. There is slavery in here, or there's slave people and stuff like that. So it's very akin to that.
Can you play a native? Can you play one of the natives?
You can play a native. You can play like a regular just Joe. You don't actually even have to be superhuman if you don't want to. Says right in the book. There's very, very liberal when it comes to character creation and what it is that you can be. So yeah, I kind of felt like this was an X card sort of a deal. You know what I mean? Like, hey, sorry about the natives and the slaves and stuff like that, but it is what it is, and we're just acknowledging it, kind of a thing. So yeah, that's sort of like what you're going to get in the first couple of pages. Again, table of contents was fantastic. The what did I write here? So the Kickstarter page in Legion of Liberty, it says that you play a young superhero who joins a group of other heroes to free the American colonies from British rule. That is the premise of the game. As the Revolutionary War progresses, you develop new superpowers. And then it just goes on to state like what they are. You fight supervillains with powers such as like puppet hunters, blah, 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 right? You get stuff like that. In Legion of Liberty, your actions may change the course of history for better or for worse. That is the tagline out of right off the Kickstarter page. So that is the premise of it, right? In Legions of Liberty, you play Legionnaires and you serve the Continental Army, which is the American Army. And it does state, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but you play powerful young superheroes. It actually mentions a few times that you're like between the ages of 17 and 20 when you start off, and you're basically your superheroes that fight against the British in the Revolutionary War. The focus of this campaign is on the military actions of the revolution. So you're doing military stuff. Sometimes it's black ops. Sometimes it's just outright, like just outright war and stuff like that. You know, straight up fights and whatnot. So you've been recruited by the Sons of Liberty, as which is a rebellious cabal responsible for acts of resistance like the Boston Tea Party. But standing against you is the English and the King's Royal Superhuman Regiment. So they're the bad guys. They're also known as the Greycoats. Your actions will determine the course of war. This is like, and this is one thing that I wrote in here as my notes. This is like a freaking choose your own adventure campaign, and I love that. This is really cool. I'll explain what that means later on. Character creation is up next. So this section just generally helps you build your character. It's pretty straightforward. You follow the guidelines from Suede. The only difference is that you are going to get arcane background superhero. So that there's a couple changes to character creation given that you're playing superheroes. So you got to pay close attention to this section. It took me a couple of reads to understand this, loosely based on the old Superpowers Companion, where the individual powers have skill points, not the associated role. So when you're doing your deal, like in the superpowers, you will take a skill like Blast, but your Blast will start off as a D4. So in order for you to improve that, you're not actually increasing your arcane background superpower, you're increasing arcane background Blast. Does that make sense?
Just to correct you a little bit, it's not based on the Superpowers Companion. It's based on the Superpowers Arcane background from previous editions of Savage Worlds. So the Explorers or Deluxe. This book doesn't need a Superpowers Companion at all.
No,
it's
straight
just a
up.
separate, yeah.
Yeah, which is really cool. You know, you don't have to buy extra stuff, and it's pretty straightforward. But if you're used to doing a thing one way, this is sort of done the other way. You take powers as advances, or you increase the power that you're taking for advances and stuff like that. So you don't roll superhuman power activate. You just roll like skill blast activate. Mm-hmm. Occupations, they have occupations in here. You can be a farmer, a trapper, a craftsman, a merchant. And one that I thought was a little weird because they put such emphasis on playing young characters is the lawyer. You know, it seemed kind of weird to me that you would be like a 17 to 20-year-old lawyer. So I'm assuming that if you're taking that, you want to be older. I don't know. It just seems out of place, as it sort of specifically says that you're supposed to be young, but you know, even back in this time, you would still have to go to law school for 2 or 3 years, maybe even more, right?
So what do these occupations do? Is it just like archetypes, or it gives you a package with skills or something like that?
Not a thing.
It's just an archetype, basically.
all. It's not even an archetype. It is just part of your backstory without really affecting anything, right? So, it doesn't affect survival or any of that kind of stuff. I'm trying to sort of scroll through it and get to where it's at, but I'm pretty sure that it doesn't do a thing. Rob Tao, American superhero. Sorry, let me just note where I'm at here. Arcane natural weapons. Here we go. Occupations. So by default, colonial characters in the Legions of Liberties are mid to late teens, or at most 20. Is the start? Is like, see what I'm saying? That it specifies that right out of the gate. Farming is done by commoners. You're a farm boy or farm girl would likely possess a wide range of basic skills, but nothing other than that says that you would get any bonuses to being a farmer. You know what I mean?
And basically, back in those days, it was all about apprenticeships, right? You were the craftsman's apprentice, or you helped your dad on the farm. So maybe with lawyer means that you just like still in training or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, even though they don't really offer any sort of mechanical benefits inside the game. If I was GMing one of these games and you were a farmer and you stumbled onto a field and, maybe you got allergies to cotton, I'd be like, hey, you recognize this is cotton and it benefits you in some way because you have skill in farmers, or, something along those lines. You recognize this is a wild beet or a wild carrot and you can eat the food, or it's just simple things.
At least with common knowledge too, it would be a way to say you got common knowledge for this. So.
Yeah, I think a better example would be, let's say you rolled a critical fail or something like that on your riding skill. Your horse throws a shoe, and you blast off into the bush. Now you've got this sort of lame horse, but you've got blacksmithing as your background. You could say, I go to the next farm and I talk to the people there, and I put my shoe back on my horse, and right, you know what I mean, something along those lines. Sort of just there for character fluff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, character creation, pretty straightforward. Just make sure you pay attention to how you get your skills, because it's not really quite like core, but it's very straightforward. The new edges section is pretty decent. I think there's 15 new edges that are listed. One of the ones that I liked was Adrenaline Rush, which is pretty cool. You get like free soak on your first roll in combat, because I guess you're like, you're raring to go. There are some decent new edges in here. Some of them are just basic, bonuses to certain skills. One of them that I don't like, my personal preference, because I think long-lived characters are, it's just not my thing. But I don't really see the point of taking longevity as an edge. It says that you live 500 years instead of 50, but it lends no benefit to the immediate story. You're not going to run this campaign or the characters through this campaign that takes place over you are going to run them through this campaign over the course of a couple years. So the point of living 500 years is really, it's a moot point, which makes this sort of a pointless edge to take. This camp,
well,
you know what I mean?
Maybe for common knowledge, if you've been alive for 400 years when that game starts,
there is that benefit. I can see what you're saying, but if you think back to the 1700s and the prevailing 500 years, you might be expert candle lighter. Do you know what I mean? Maybe you're a little smarter, but it doesn't really give you any benefit other than you have an increased lifespan, which in the confines of what this Legions of Liberty thing is, does you no good. So
you'd be good at Jeopardy.
Yeah, 500 years in the future when you're playing by yourself and all your parties, turn to dust. Sorry about your bad luck, but you're all dead, and here I am playing Jeopardy, alone because you have no party members left. Yeah, other than that was really the only thing that I had sort of anything negative to say about inside of the edge, because again, I don't really want to talk about them, because you should buy the book if you're interested in playing, other than to say they're actually somewhat decent. There's some cool stuff in here. The first one that I said was Adrenaline Rush, which is pretty cool. You walk in, and the first time you're damaged in combat, you can just make a free soak roll without spending a penny. pretty decent edge.
Cool.
Uh,
Well,
right?
what about those new powers? Since we're about superpowers, you were talking about cool superpowers.
The
Lay it
cool
on me, Gary.
Okay, so we're going to skip past the hindrances then. Let's get into the superpowers. One of the things to note is that this plays with no PowerPoints or as part of the setting rule. So you can choose PowerPoints or not. I'm not sure if I just scroll back here to the whatchamacallit thing. Sometimes I go past where I want to go. I just wanted to see the edge for superpower. Okay, arcane background superhuman is the free edge that you get. And I don't see anywhere in here where it says anything about, oh, here it is. Superhumans receive 5 free skill points to purchase superhuman powers and skills, 3 extra attribute points, and 1 extra free edge. So if you take the superpower, but there is no points applied to it. Okay, just to be clear, there's like a no point deal going on here. New powers. Well, let's skip over the hindrances, Mr. Lamoureux, and let's go right to the new powers and then come back to the hindrances. Sound good to you?
Yeah, sure. Just keep in mind we got about 20 minutes left for this. So.
Okay. You ready? Here we go. Yeah. New powers. All right, so the meat and potatoes right here. Here we go. Bomber. you have the superpower to frickin' blow yourself up. You explode for 2d10, which is pretty nice. And then all your bits and stuff get blown away. You come back naked. But if you roll a raise on your explosion, you come back with your equipment, or it just falls off in the ground when you blow up. How do you like that action? Conjuration, you can make cool stuff appear. Gate, you can portal between places up to 100 miles. Not too bad, right? The only thing I found with this, the new power section is immunity and energy transformation are basically the same power with one minor tweak. They both allow you to become immune to a damage type, but the end result after is a little bit different in that with energy transformation, if you get hit, say you take bludgeoning, you get hit by a bludgeoning thing, you can turn that bludgeon power with energy transformation into power points if you're playing with them. But it says no power points. A little weird. You got other cool things like mimic, state shift, which is you could become solid, liquid, or air. And stretch, which gives you rubber parts, which is pretty sweet, man. You know what I'd do if I had stretch?
Let's not go there.
All right.
So one question, because when this Kickstarter was going on, Scott was talking about kind of reflexive powers, because you just talked about immunity to damage, but normally with a power in Savage Rules, you have to activate it on your turn and you have to roll your skill, appropriate skill, and, activate it. So how does it work if you get hit by something and now you have to activate that power? Is that, you know what I'm saying? You've been reading that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I got the gist of what you're saying. So if I was to read it, it says when cast, energy transformation confers immunity to one specific type of damage. This could be fire, cold, or energy. When you get hit by, the caster may only have one transformation on at a time. Every time you are hit with that type of damage, you instead regain 2 power points, 4 with a raise, up to your maximum power points. Again, we're not playing with PowerPoints because the setting rule says no PowerPoints. So do you see where it's like a little bit conflicting? Now,
I look at something now under setting rules. It's called powers under stress. In non-stressful situations, outside of combat, social conflict, chases, or dramatic tasks, Legionnaires may use their superpowers without rolling. However, they may not access the raise effect of these skills. So that's different. Yeah.
So here's the thing too, like when you're rolling, the no power points thing that kicks in is you need to figure out how many power points you would use. So if you're using, say, like 2 power points or 4 power points, let's say you're using 2 power points. Basically, the penalty to cast it at a 2 power point deal is half of that. So when you make your roll, you have to succeed at a -1 for 2 power points, right? So if you're casting, let's say you had the ability to cover all of your party in armor, and that's going to end up costing you 6 power points. You make that roll at a -3 and succeed on your D8. So
Right.
4 would be,
I get that, but let's say you're going to shoot me and I have immunity to that damage, but it's a power.
yes.
But it's not my turn. It's your turn in initiative, and you're shooting me. How do I activate that immunity power?
Okay, so you would activate it as you start combat, and it would just hover in the background. So you know, as soon as you get into combat, you're like, my first move is to cast immunity to bludgeoning, because you don't want to get hit with a bullet, right? So
I would have to spend an action every combat to activate that power.
You have to activate it once, and then it's always up and running on you. I'm just seeing if this thing has any. So the PowerPoint cost to cast this spell is 10. Range is touch, and its duration is 5 rounds. So you cast it, and it just sits on you for 5 rounds. And if you get shot anywhere in those 5 rounds, you automatically get PowerPoints back. After the 5 rounds, it's 2 per round.
All right.
Which, right? So I'm assuming that the PowerPoint cost with no PowerPoints at a cost of 10 would be -5 to your roll. Seems a little bit, but this is a veteran spell too, by the way. So I'm assuming by the time you got where you needed to be with this, at veteran rank, you probably have a D12 in your superhuman deal or whatever spell this is that you're trying to cast. That's my assumption. See how I never really got into superheroes? Because when you start taking away PowerPoints and adding immunities and you know, vulnerability, it's just, it kind of goes a little bit overboard for me. But even still, the powers list is pretty good. I had really no complaints. It's well done, sort of well put together. The PowerPoints thing, if it works like the way that I think it does, is. Oh, here's one other thing too that I forgot to mention. There's a lot of skills and abilities in here that are veteran and heroic level and stuff like that. And from, if you know, you'd have to play a pretty long campaign in order to get that high, and there isn't enough content here without you creating your own to get to where you need to be if you started as say like a novice. I'll explain what that means later. Setting rules, no PowerPoints is a modifier. Born a hero, so you ignore rank at creation. Heroes never die. Creative combat. I started reading this after you had said we were going to do creative combat inside the Thrilling Tales that we're doing, and I'm like, creative combat actually looks really cool. It's something that I think everybody should pay a little bit more attention to. That's some pretty slick stuff right there, but that's really not part of this book. You have to look that up in core. Power under stress says you use no powers, no worries in everyday life. Pretty straightforward. So if you're just farting around doing a thing and you wanted to like stretch out and grab a drink off the table and you know it's 10 feet away and you just make your rubber arm stretch, that's the kind of thing that affects. Everything is musket tech, black powder only. There's one thing called the Springfield rifle, and then other than that, that's it for sort of the settings. Sample characters. There's 10 superhuman pre-made characters, including guess who? Rob Towell.
Rob Towell.
Yep. Rob Towell went in for like the full meal deal, and he got himself to be one of the superhumans in here. So
nice.
Actually, in the book, which is pretty funny. Colonial Society. Page 18 has a section entitled Colonial Society. Everyone should look at this section. Like we were talking earlier, you're asking me, is there information about what it was like at this time or the war and all this other stuff? This is where you want to look. It's going to give you a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of rundown on how things work in this time. It's precise. It's to the point. You know, boom, boom, boom. This is it. If you don't know what life was like during this time, you can just sort of get a little glimpse as to what it is. It's very, very on point and concise, which is super cool, man. Like the Colonial Society is literally, this book is littered with these little blurbs of like factualisms or truisms. Do you know what I mean? So as you're reading through some of the adventures, there'll be a little box text kind of up in the side, which is like, this is what really happened. and then here's the adventure, not so much based off that, but here's the adventure, and then there's a little box that says this is what really happened. And that's what this colonial society is. This is what it was really like at these times. So these are things to take into consideration. And it is like less than a page that you have to read. I don't know why I wrote this. There's no coddling the baby social justice warriors here. It's plain and simple. It says players and GMs must decide the level at which they want to confront the issues in the game. Such things as slavery, taking out the Indians, that kind of stuff. I liked this section because it's non-apologetic nature. This is how it was, and you decided to come and sit down and play at a game that takes place in 1776 where there was slavery and war and all of this stuff. That is essentially this colonial society segment, which I think is bold and pretty sweet. After that, speeding things along, American superheroes, page 24. This section starts to detail how superheroes were discovered, how the wars were started, who hates who, and why. Back to what you were asking me earlier, Lamoureux, this is why I was kind of glad that this wasn't in the book. I don't want a freaking history lesson. I don't need a history lesson. Whether or not you know about the American Revolution or any of that stuff, it's irrelevant when you dial right into the actual adventures that you're going to be running in the back of this book. And I'll you know what I mean? Like, when we talk about the first adventure, you're going to realize that all the stuff on the outskirts of the adventure is irrelevant because you're just involved in like an old-timey city doing an old-timey thing with old-timey stuff. It doesn't matter who likes who or what the other premises are or what the history of the situation is. You're sort of told throughout the quests that these are the reasons that you're doing this, and this is the reason why, and it takes out all of the boring and mundane history that you don't need and just leaves it out of the game. So for a game master, this was the thing about this book that I loved the most, that I didn't have to read 300 pages of backstories about places, people, things, any of that kind of stuff, right? It was
what
fantastic.
you're trying to say basically is that this book gives you just enough information to be able to run this setting, and the rest, well, if you want to find out more, you can just Google it, right?
Exactly. Yes, I want to shake this man's hand. One of my note here is here's another sterling example of how to write a book for role playing. Rather than bore me to tears writing down what the Boston Tea Party or the Act of Intolerances are, they are just mentioned and left for me to go find the information if it becomes necessary. So there's little things that are in here that you can go look up on your own, but they're not necessary to the deal. So it's like you're fighting this guy because of the Boston Tea Party, but that part of it doesn't matter. So you don't have this long drawn out, here's the Boston Tea Party, here's who did what, because it's irrelevant to the actual quest or adventure that you're going on.
Gotcha.
Next on the agenda, Eastern North American Gazetteer. So this is an example of low quality formatting that I was talking about. This new section starts in the middle of the page. There should be like nice artwork here, and it should start at a fresh page. Just things like this that I feel are like things that make this book not look so pretty. But inside of this is the section that's going to detail like the places and areas that you're fighting in. Iroquois country, the Southwest, former New France, and then there's 13 colonies. So this is all for the players to read up on. It's all in the players section. But the stuff inside the 13 colonies just tells you like a small little paragraph on what's going on in places like Delaware or what's happening in Boston, that kind of stuff. It is so minuscule because again, most of this stuff is usually like when you're playing an adventure, you're sort of focused on somebody's farm and a bridge and trying to take some people out. You're not focused on what's happening in the politics of Delaware or Maryland or Massachusetts, right? But if you needed a little bit of a blurb to know what's going on there, it's in the book. So there's a page and a half that goes over 13 different sort of colonies that you can read up on. That's in the player section for them to look into. Right up my alley. Absolutely love it. So at this stage, we're 32 pages into it. Player section's done. Now we get into the game master stuff. We open this section with the Greycoats and a list of superheroes that are working for the British. There's 2 or 3 pages of Greycoats and a little bit about them and the skills they have. This book is actually totally littered with pre-generated characters and pre-generated stats for different people, which is pretty cool. You learn about the Order of the Seventh Circle. There's things on here for native NPCs. I think there's 9 order people in the Order of the Seventh Circle that you're going to read about, and there's 6 natives that are in here. So, if you just to come to this section as a game master, somebody walked up, you were asking me if you wanted to play a native. If somebody came up to me and said, hey, I wanted to play a Native American in this game that did or did not have superpowers, you could literally just go to this section and copy these stats out and say, here's your base stats for these Native Americans. Just strap on the superhuman power and away you go. There's 3 revolutionary guys in here, including George Washington that's been statted out. I think maybe Hancock might be in here as well, but it is pretty neat to sort of read these things and see, like who's who and how the stats work out. So you have some natives. The revolutionaries are General George Washington, Henry Waters, and Samuel Jones. Pretty sweet, right? Then you got some British dudes in here. There's 9 of these guys. So you have like a literal like pool of people and that you can pull from to throw into your game. Stats ready, done. Read a little bit about them. And that takes us to page 46. So you're pretty much halfway through the book when the plot point campaign starts. Now, we're going to end this review talking about the Battle of Salem sort of in depth. And this is going to be, again, the cool meat and potatoes part of this adventure and why I actually really like this and regret that I didn't back it. I wish I would have known some of this stuff. So the Battle of Salem is the first adventure that you go on. It is February 1775. Colonel David Mason of the Salem militia has equipped his troops with 19 French cannons. He's a guy on the red team. Thomas Gage, the governor of Massachusetts, he's the bad guys, are going to send Thomas Leslie and the 64th Foot, which is, I guess, a regiment of people, to go get them cannons. So spies in Gage's office tell the Sons of Liberty, who must decide how to respond. What are you going to do? Are you going to go talk to these guys? Are you going to go tell Colonel David Mason that Thomas Gage is coming and he's going to take your cannons and F with your stuff? So once you figured that out, the Sons, this might sort of railroad you a little bit, but the Sons decide to swarm Salem of Leslie, or to warn, swarm. The Sons decide to warn Salem of Leslie's intent. And the only man for the job is Paul Revere, legendary speedster. And I was like, yeah, I never thought of that, man. Paul Revere, right? Everybody knows Paul Revere. He went from town to town, warning the redcoats for coming or whatever the hell he was doing back and then. But turns out in this game, he is a legendary speedster. How cool is that? The problem is Paul's under close and constant surveillance as a known superhuman. So he is, the governments are aware that he has these super fast powers. Revere is under house arrest and there's 4 guards around him. The ground floor windows have been partially boarded up and a larger garrison is a short distance away and will bring redcoats if any loud noises are heard. With or without Paul, the heroes are forced to succeed on a chase to reach the boat and take them to safety. That part might seem like I've jumped ahead. So that is you see what I'm saying? Like, you don't need to know all the colony stuff. You don't need to know all the history. You don't need any of that. You just have to have a gist that your players are from 1776. You don't have cell phones. You don't have any of that crap. You got black powder guns. There's a guy that you need to rescue from a boarded up building that has 4 guards around it. Go.
And he's a speedster. Yeah.
Right. So like I said, this is why this book appealed to me, because it's like he really basically just scraped off all the historical crud. Feel free to go read that on your own time. This is essentially the nuts and bolts of what you need to read. So you, however you do it, rescue Paul Revere. And Whether or not he comes with you or you manage to rescue him, maybe he gets killed. Who knows, right? But the deal is that regardless of whether or not Paul comes with you, you get chased to where you're supposed to get onto a boat that's going to take you to safety. So you end up going to Salem, where this battle is going to happen. The battle between Colonel Alexander Leslie, he's the bad guy that's coming to get the cannons, and the 64th versus Colonel Timothy Pickering, the party and Pickering's men. So how that works out is Colonel Timothy Pickering is the guy you're going to warn. So it's him, your party, the immediate players, and his men. You fight Alexander Leslie, the bad guy, and he has 5 superhumans with him. And that is your initial sort of big battle. After you do a thing with Paul Revere, determine the outcome, this is where you end up. So then the outcome, hell yes, leads to the rest of the plot point campaign in each, where the scenarios outcome leads you down another path. And I wrote in capitals, great effing idea. This book just became a freaking choose your own adventure plot point campaign. Huh? So
that's how they should be, right? Plot point campaigns. You should be able to have some leeway in there and where you go and what you do.
Yes. And so this section is already sort of like littered with little snippets of what really happened. And then behind that, there's 20 adventures in this plot point campaign that I sort of, looked at. I did read them all. It is very good. And they're just generally like this. This was a major thing that happened in the Battle of Salem, was like a major deal. The snippet tells you about Leslie's retreat. It says in 1775, Colonel Leslie of the 64th Foot did this thing, blah, blah, blah. The two of them confronted one another. There was no bloodshed because something happened, which you guys can read. And the 64th didn't cross this bridge onto the guy's farm. And that sort of set the war back in the time, like by 2 months. There was no actual bloodshed because of being pre-warned. Say this doesn't happen, it's like, then go to this page and kick some ass and take some names, right? Which is really freaking cool.
All right, here's one question, because usually in plot point campaigns, you really affect the outcome of history or whatever. You can change the whole world. I mean, you look at the flood, and ends up with, disappearance of most of California, basically. But so in this one, because it's about America's independence, is how do you make it better? Or is it more like, can you screw it up to where America doesn't get its independence? Because it's going to happen according to history. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, how can you make it better? How can you alter history with a better outcome than this?
Okay, I got what you're saying, and I don't even really know if I have an answer to that question. I think in the end, basically everything is going to work out to where the American Revolution happens. What you're sort of altering is more along the lines of the events and the bloodshed that happens in certain places. Okay. So if you achieve victory during this quest, it tells you to go to the Battle of Bunker Hill on page 53. If the British achieve victory, then you go to the Battle of Concord. So this is where I wouldn't say the choose your own adventure part. This is where whether or not you succeed or fail affects sort of the outcome of the story. You could probably play this a couple of times, very similar, and end up with sort of a different result both times. Paul Revere is statted out in here. There's no picture of him. He's got the powers, speed, protection, and deflection. And then you've got your colonel statted out, and you've got Colonel Timothy Pickering statted out. So here's what I want to add about this. What I would like to see here is a couple of battle maps for the adventures. Give me some paper minis, virtual minis, something like that, something along those lines. The map at the bottom of this adventure is basically illegible garbage. It's on page 48, Eric, if you want to look at it. I can't read basically any of what this writing says. It does say Colonel something or other, Repulf Repulfer at Salem, February 26, 1775. This looks like an image of something, and it's just a crudely little drawn, like I would draw a battle map on the ground. but this does me no good, right? Like most of it is illegible. It looks like it says something about blacksmithing, February 15th. And then there's just a picture of the river and a bit of a farm and a bridge. You do have across a river or across a bridge when you read the details of this quest, right? That, like, you're trying to stop them from crossing this bridge and forcing the cannon's hand, the guy with the cannon's hand and stuff, right? So, but when you go into battle, when I was reading this, the gist of this is you're not doing the mass battle stuff. You are, but that is sort of behind the scenes. What I liked about this was that you take your party and you affect the outcome of the mass battle happening in the background, because you're actually entangled with another group of superheroes. So your super party is attacking their super party, and while that is going on in the front, like in your immediate purview, there is a mass battle always happening in the background. And depending on what happens in the mass battle determines whether or not the British or the colonial win. And you can affect that as a superhero. But you're not really involved in rolling 1,000 frickin' dice or any of that stuff. You're just kind of like duking it out with other superheroes and stuff like that, which is really actually a pretty cool simplified way of looking at this thing. And then you do that for 20 adventures, follow the plot point campaign through to the end. And that's it for this book. You know what I mean? This isn't so much a setting as it is like just a glorified plot point campaign. I loved it, man. Overall, I'm giving this bad boy like a 5 out of 6 on the wild die. Taking away points for presentation. I feel like I could have done a similar job in the layout. I know it's the 3rd or 4th time I've said it. It's not fancy. It's not pretty to look at. The art is all over the place in its style, and some of it's taken from the internet. But that said, it doesn't really lose points for the way that it looks. It just
like
doesn't.
The content is still good.
Right. The content is fantastic. It's this speaks to me in so many ways as a busy person that does not have time to read 300 pages of just useless information. It gives you what you need to sit down and play the game. You could read this in a weekend and start your 20 plot point campaign adventure with your 1776 legion of superheroes kind of a deal. So yeah, it's nice enough. It does have art. It's logically assembled. It's not confusing. Table of contents was on point. Unlike some other stuff that I've read in the past, I don't think that I found anywhere in here where it contradicts itself, where you're reading it and it says, okay, so this happened during this time, and then in another point you're reading it and it's like the exact opposite thing happened. Like they just sort of forgot the story that they were telling, or somehow over the course of writing it changed. There wasn't any of that. A couple minor things with the spell points and stuff like that, but not really that big of a deal. There is a character sheet that comes with this that is absolute hot garbage. It reminds me of what I did when I was a kid, playing D&D when I was like 8 years old, and I just had lined paper and I would just draw in strength, dexterity, you know what I mean? Yeah. But again, not a big deal because there's a lot of character sheets for Savage Worlds, so you don't even need to use this thing. It's just red boxes with your skills and your tributes. It's I don't even know what to say. Point loss again is very minimal for crappy maps and no paper minis. But hold on a second, let me start that over. Point loss is minimal again for crappy maps and no paper minis. But again, this isn't really a point loss. It is more of a reason not to give it 6 out of 6. To the general creating public, including Peg Inc., I want more battle maps. It's almost 2020 and we have access to the internet. Here's where you need to swing your shizzle. Keep your fancy interior art. It does me no good sitting on the shelf. When I read your book and imagine, my dog's freaking out. When I read your book and imagine where the consumer is going to need a battle map to play on, in your plot point campaign or story and provide one, I would get a lot more use out of that than a picture. That's just my general feeling overall. There's a lot of times, like we've talked about this in The Flood, where you go battle some stuff in the underground railroad area and there's no map for that. There's nothing provided. It's, you got a theater of the mind, the whole thing, but a lot of people do stuff where they play online. So I feel like as in general, people should be not putting so much into the artwork. And then I'm being a hypocrite because I'm like taking points away for, you know what I mean? Not being the best layout. But ending on a bright note, man, I really like this product. It spoke to me in a way where it's like, as a GM, I appreciate everything that Scott Marchand Davis did in creating this product for me as a game master. I just want to, if he listens to this, I just want to personally say thank you, Mr. Davis. I feel like you listen to me and my ramblings on the Wild Eye podcast, and this is the product that you created for me as a busy person that still runs games. It was literally that good. It's 100 pages. 95% goodness. There's very little backstory to read. Locations are minimalistic. 13 colonies in a paragraph or two. Nothing really long. There's no boring behind the scenes history lessons that no one cares about. My players will never read, and I will never use. Nothing like that is in this book. So as a GM, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that this book is mostly just adventures. It's like literally 5% history, location, and story, and 95% actually stuff to do. This book is right up my alley, and if you're a creator, you should take a page out of Scott's book and copy this format. That's how much I think that what he did is sort of brilliance on a weird level, regardless of the bad things I've said. As a game master, I don't want to read a history book to play a game. I don't have time to read all the lore in every system from Savage Worlds. There isn't enough lifetime. Savage Worlds has so much stuff. Scott incorporates the information you need to run the game directly from the plot point campaign info. In the scenario we discussed, you could just run to that house, or you could just run that and not read the book. And you only need to know the good guys, the bad guys, and party inspirations, and a reason to kick gas and take names. Bravo, Mr. Davis, for creating this. You appealed to me with minimal backstory, major gameplay elements, and I am regretting not backing this book. This concludes my review of 1776.
Well, thank you, Gary. It's good that finally you get to read a book that you actually enjoy.
It's shocking, man. To be honest with you, I was literally blown away when I was reading this. I'm like, more people need to do this. This is right up my alley. You know what I mean? Like, he focused on the quests, fills you in with the information you need to do the quests. And other than that, the rest of it is just sort of like exterior gameplay, that information that you won't ever use. It just sits in your GM's brain and takes up time to read, and, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Gary. I hope the listeners enjoy this, and if you think that's for you, then go pick up Legion of Liberty. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could literally go buy this book, spend a weekend reading it, and start a 20-point plot point campaign, and you're done. You've read it in 2 days, and away you go. You're off to the games.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary.
All right. Adios.
Wild Eye Podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Pinnacle Entertainment Group or official Pinnacle licensees. Any of the products mentioned on our show or appear on our website are the property and copyright of the respected owners. All music and artwork is used with permission of Pinnacle Entertainment Group. All items are used under fair use and educational and review purposes. All other items are the intellectual property of the Wild Eye Podcast.